So what happens when a 75-year-old professor decides to take on the entire Silicon Valley housing machine? Well, we're about to find out. This isn't just some typical lawsuit. He's calling it a formal indictment against a system he says is oppressive and discriminatory. It's a formal complaint sent straight to the state's top lawyer, and we're going to break down his case.
Right out of the gate, these are the words he uses to open his plea to the Attorney General of California. This isn't just dry legal talk. He frames it as an urgent cry for help. It tells you immediately that this is a deeply personal fight against some really powerful corporate and state players.
All right, to get our heads around this, we're going to walk through it in 4 parts. First, we'll meet the professor himself. Then, we'll follow this trail of allegations he lays out. After that, we'll see how his fight actually puts the whole support system on trial. And finally, we'll look at exactly what he's demanding for justice. So first things first, who is the academic making these incredibly serious charges? Let's take a closer look at the man behind this indictment. Meet Professor Dr. Mohamed Ibrahim Fayad. He's a former professor from San Jose State University, and he's about to turn 75. He says his academic career was just terminated, kicking off what he calls a systematic campaign of character assassination and an attack on his basic right to have a roof over his head. So you can see, he's not just a tenant with a complaint, he's an academic, and he is meticulously building his case. And the language he uses, wow, it's incredibly strong. He argues the housing system has become a tool of oppression that's run with an organized crime mentality. This tells us that, from his perspective, this isn't just about bad landlords or frustrating paperwork. He sees it as a systemic, malicious operation. Okay, now let's follow the evidence. We're going to walk through the specific corporate run-ins that really form the backbone of his indictment, one exhibit at a time. So, the first company in the hot seat is Avenas San Jose. According to Dr. Fayad, his experience here wasn't just bad. It spiraled into what he alleges was harassment and straight-up financial misconduct. He claims the living conditions were just unsanitary and that he was treated in a demeaning way. But the real heart of the accusation is about money. He says the company sicked debt collectors on him for money he didn't even owe, and he even accuses them of documented theft by taking his funds for over 4 years. But his search for a dignified place to live kept going, and that led him to 2 more companies, Prado and Villa Granada. And it's here that the financial claims get even crazier. Look at this number. This is at the center of his next big allegation. To apply for an apartment that rented for just under $2,900 a month, Dr. Fayad says he was forced to pay this, over $3,000 in all sorts of fees and costs before he could even get the keys. I mean, it really makes you wonder about the cost of just applying for a home. And this brings us to a question he asks directly in his complaint. He asks, how can a simple application for a service get turned into what he calls a financial heist? It's a pretty powerful way to challenge the whole rental application game. The last corporate exhibit is Citygate Cupertino. This is the most detailed part of his indictment, and it's where he says he experienced a uniquely modern kind of abuse, one that happens entirely through a computer screen. He calls it digital torture. What he means by that is an online application that should have taken, 15 minutes, but instead it became this brutal 6-hour ordeal over 2 days. He alleges this wasn't just a buggy website, but that it had artificial technical hurdles specifically designed to frustrate and shut out older applicants like him. And here's the final straw at Citygate. After all that, after picking and getting a preliminary okay for Unit 105, he says that right after his struggle with the online portal, that apartment was suddenly gone. Instead, they offered him Unit 172, which he says was worse. For him, it felt like a classic bait and switch. So now, the story gets bigger. It moves from accusations against private companies to a critique of the public safety net itself. Dr. Fayad argues that the very institutions that are supposed to help people in his situation, well, they failed him too. He calls out the Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, or SVILC, by name. He says this support agency gave him just one single visit that went nowhere, and he accuses them of negligence and corruption. And then he raises this really explosive idea of collusion between these agencies and the big real estate firms, basically suggesting they're working against the very people they're paid to protect. So after laying out all his evidence, Dr. Fayad doesn't just leave it there. He wraps things up with 4 very specific demands: a direct appeal to what he calls the state's legal conscience. Here's what he wants. Number 1, an urgent investigation into the real estate firms for extortion and age discrimination. 2, accountability for that digital torture at Citygate. 3, a formal review of his termination from the university, which he thinks is what started this whole crisis. And 4, immediate legal protection from debt collector harassment.
He ends his entire indictment with this powerful ultimatum. He basically puts his life's work as a scientist and his vulnerability as an older person in the hands of the authorities and challenges them. Prove that the law protects citizens like me, or just admit that it doesn't. It is a really stark and dramatic way to end his plea.
And that leaves us with this final question to think about. When a single person, an elderly professor, puts together a case this detailed with charges this severe, are just the companies on trial, or is it the whole system they operate in? What does one man's cry for help tell us about the much bigger relationship between people, power, and the simple right to have a home?